Have you ever thought about what it might take to open up a cookbook store in an age when you can buy nearly any book with the click of a mouse? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Molly Stevens, and I am here today with Kate Leahy. Hello, Kate.
Hey, Molly.
So, cookbook sales. You can buy go on Amazon, go on Barnes & Noble. There are more and more books published every year. But how do you figure out what books, especially if you're not insidery and super geeky about cookbooks, how do you figure out what book you want?
Well, I think that's why cookbook stores are so invaluable. And you can buy books from them with a click of a mouse, too.
Right.
But these are the small independent bookstores that the owners take the time to curate the books that they find valuable. I remember going into Kitchen Arts and Letters and asking what books they might have on Armenia. Mm-hmm. I think it was Knock Waxman going down into the basement, pulling out a book from Sonia Uvetzian that came out in 1978 that was out of print. I'm not going to find that on the internet.
Right.
And also I had a conversation about Armenian food and how he actually knew the author who had since passed away. I mean, these are they give me chills because these are like moments when you're connecting with your people,
Right. And I think we're in an age where we're seeing, it seems like there are independent cookbook stores popping up and doing well. And I hope it's a trend and I hope it's growing because I think there's a lot we can learn both as users of cookbooks, but also as authors of cookbooks.
Absolutely.
These are real experts, and I'm super excited about today's episode because our guests today are the owners of Now Serving, the renowned cookbook store in LA's Chinatown. It's a husband and wife team. Concepcion and Michelle Mungcal are coming on to talk to us about their journey opening up Now Serving, I think about 7 or 8 years ago. So I can't wait to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, let's bring them on.
Michelle and Ken, welcome to Everything Cookbooks. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
We've actually been trying to get you on for a while. And I'm just really appreciate you taking the time. We know you're super busy. So we want to go back a little bit and talk about before you opened the shop. And this, Ken, I think is really a question for you because you were a chef, you were a cook before. Mm-hmm. Just wondering, how important were cookbooks in your own culinary education? Did you have a large collection? How did you figure out what books you needed or wanted to read and study? And
yeah, that's a great question. And I think it really kind of informs what we do here to an extent. I was cooking professionally for almost 20 years, mostly in fine dining. And I didn't go to culinary school. I started cooking about 2 years after I finished college in St. Louis. Everyone I talked to basically said, just start working at a restaurant and see if you like it. That was kind of it. I like to date myself now when I say it was kind of pre-internet, but it was. And, it was learning on the job at restaurants and reading cookbooks when I got home because I felt like I had to overcompensate with not being I was the only one in one of the kitchens I was in. I was the only one who didn't have a degree.
Oh.
I was like, well, okay, I really have to kind of study up. So cookbooks were really important to me.
I can relate to that so much because I remember being in a kitchen. I was doing a stage and I hadn't been to cooking school and just looking at a pot that was on the stove and I was, what's that? It's like, fish fume. It's like, well, what's fish fume? It's like, go to cooking school and you'll find out. So I totally, I don't know if you had stories like that. They're just like, you got to learn. I'm not going to bother teaching you at this moment.
Yeah, I actually wanted to go to CIA, but you get the first notice for your college loan. And then back then, CIA actually made it mandatory that you had to work in a restaurant for 6 months, which I think was really smart.
Really, I couldn't agree with you more. I taught at a culinary college for years, and the students who came in who'd never been in a kitchen was like, "What are you doing here? You need to know you want to be in a kitchen." Yeah. But so the books you said you'd study. How'd you figure out what books you needed to study?
A lot of it was foundational books like Culinary Artistry and Sauces by James Peterson.
That's the book that made me want to write a cookbook.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that book just completely blew me away.
I just had to order more yesterday. Wow. It's really cool to see also this generation of cooks, they walk in and they're like, I need a book on sauces. And I was like, I think we have the one for you. So, and they see that it's just this massive tome, books like that. And then this was also really when the Food Network started blowing up in the late 90s. So, a lot of those chefs I was really kind of enamored with, and I dove deep into the food. As a young cook, there's chefs who just really introduce you into a cuisine. Even watching Emeril as a college kid, and then, you learn about, New Orleans food and Creole and Cajun and the differences between all three. And it was really kind of a cool gateway to go down.
So interesting. So now we've left St. Louis, we're in LA, you're cooking professionally, and then you and Michelle together open a culinary bookstore.
Yeah.
Really, the long and the short of it.
How do you get there?
I worked for Wolfgang Puck for about 12 years. I was the chef of his fancy, I like to call it the fancy steakhouse place because it is, Cut in Beverly Hills. Mm-hmm. Michelle and I, we started going out in 2009.
2008.
2000. Okay, we can edit that. We were together, and obviously there's been so much written and talked about how the challenges of not just work-life balance, but also the idea of, starting a family, even maintaining a sane relationship in the hospitality industry is challenging. So I think we got to a point where I feel like it was like after the 10-year anniversary of Cut, I mean, we had already started thinking about doing something different, and me moving on from fine dining. And then, this idea of Now Serving, I feel like it was kind of like tickling the back of our brain for a while. Yeah, it really was like a way for us to do something together. At the time, the longtime cookbook store, much beloved cookbook store, Cook's Library in LA.
Ellen Rose's store, right? Yeah.
That had closed in, I think, 2009. Mm-hmm. And then we opened our shop in 2017. So it was almost 10 years, a 10-year gap for LA not having a dedicated space like this. But it was really also a way for us to kind of find ourselves. And I might be jumping the timeline here, but it was our first week of being open, we found out Michelle was pregnant. So the shop is only 6 months older than our daughter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Michelle, you were in a completely different career.
I worked front of the house, but never at the level that Ken cooked at. I grew up in the suburbs, so it was a lot of chain restaurants. So the whole cookbook thing was when he was trying to figure out what to do if he decided to leave the restaurant, I kind of thought about, okay, great, I'm going to have access to him now, because I come from production world. So I'm a makeup artist. So his hours would mimic that. He'd be at the restaurant for 12 hours, I would say. And so all of a sudden thinking about him being available all that time kind of freaked me out, because then it was like, wow, that's a lot of access to you that I didn't have before.
Right.
So then I was kind of like, okay, I'll have access to him, but he might be really miserable, because the love of cooking and being in a restaurant and all of that hadn't left. Like, he wasn't jaded. He wasn't burnt out. You should speak to this. Like, were you ready to leave, or did you feel like you just needed to leave because we were at this point in our relationship where you wanted to have a family and I was struggling with the idea of it? Like, if I hadn't had that struggle, you might have stayed at the restaurant, right?
Honestly, I was ready to. I always say, when you're ready to leave a job, you just know. Mm-hmm. And the 10-year thing was the sign, okay, it's time to move on.
I feel like if you can't see where you're going to be next in a job,
right? To
me, that's a sign that maybe this is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the physical nature, too, of cooking, I feel it's almost like that's why you have the young line cooks that come in. It's almost like professional sports. You get to a certain level where it's like, okay, maybe I can't do that Saturday night anymore, but I have to coach now or something. Like your body kind of starts to say, I don't know
for sure
that this is for you.
Yeah, and I really loved cooking at that level, the adrenaline and the ingredients and the products and the camaraderie of restaurants like that, and restaurants in general. And, I loved working for Wolfgang, but definitely felt like it was time for me to move on and to be able to do something with Michelle, my partner. It felt like a special opportunity we had to explore.
It's interesting. You talk about camaraderie. And so this decision to open a bookstore, but I feel like Now Serving is so much more than a bookstore. I mean, I'm on the East Coast, and unfortunately, I was supposed to get out there right before the pandemic, and I was one of your early Zoom book talks. But from everyone I talked to, it has this real community vibe to it. Is that a deliberate engendering? I mean, because you've kept in the culinary field. You're like now working with, you have access to all these other people. So it's, to back up, how do you start a bookstore if you've never worked in retail and you don't know how to start a bookstore?
I don't know.
Yeah, you find out. Let us
We
know.
still don't know.
7 years later.
Yeah. A lot of what I've learned in the last 7 years is that if you have an idea, you just have to sometimes start without having it all in place, because you can just ruminate and spiral and plan and plan and plan and never start. So we just kind of had to start. Like Ken had left the restaurant. This needed to happen. We definitely owe a lot to Celia of Omnivore and Knack and Matt from Kitchen Arts and Letters, because we did reach out to them. Ken has definitely had frequented both places a lot throughout his career. And whenever we went on vacation to like San Francisco or New York, there was always books coming back with us. And they were really gracious with the advice and honesty, and like they didn't sugarcoat it, and they didn't also feel threatened by it. They kind of welcomed. They thought Celia was really helpful in saying that it would maybe help more authors promote, because then there would be another stop on the West Coast. So she kind of felt like that would maybe help her get some authors as well. So it was really great that they didn't make us feel like we were encroaching on something or going to take something away from them. And we really did want their blessing, because we had so much respect for what they did. And that was never our intention to just come in and like take over. Not that you could take over, but that kind of idea. We wanted to be like included in the conversation with them. That helped us inform. And I think one of the things that we learned is that it's going to tell you what it wants to be. The store has definitely told us who it wants to be, but we knew what set us apart from other bookstores and other cookbook stores was that Ken had all this work experience in the kitchen. And that was kind of who, when we went initially, we were like, this is the audience. And then Now Serving kind of told us that we could have more than just that audience. And in that time has kind of told us who it appeals to and who it wants to be. And it's a nice mix of home cooks and industry. And that's been really great, because I think it keeps Ken kind of still in the know of what's happening and talking to people in the industry. But then I have no cooking experience. So with the home cooks or people looking for presents or whatnot, I don't feel left out of the conversation either.
Right.
It's not like too insidery. It's not too,
So interesting to hear about the information you were able to get from both Kitchen Arts and Letters and Omnivore Books. That just makes me feel good that I know that there's like this camaraderie that at the beginning, like they were very open with sharing their advice. But I also am curious about how you had this idea for a store, but it has to be a physical thing that exists in the world. So how did you pick your location in Chinatown in LA? Like, what was that decision process like?
Well, Chinatown was like, because a lot of our friends and chefs and cooks, they kind of gravitated towards the neighborhood because there were a couple places were opening up. At this time it was like Roy Choi had Chago, and then Andy Ricker had opened up a little wing spot here. And so there was a bunch of chefs in our Filipino food community. We came down here to hang out with them, and it kind of grew from there. And there was a space that we were looking at, and it was available. And we were talking with the landlord, and I remember I had mentioned that I had quit my job. He was like, why the hell did you do that? He's like, you didn't tell me that. Right. And then, and I think there's something, being from New York and growing up, going into Chinatown, every weekend my parents would go and shop. I have distinct memories of like sitting in the backseat of the parked car, and my parents would just like hand us dim sum while they would make the rounds and stuff. There was something very like familiar and comforting about Chinatown here.
And it's a pretty small space.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, tell us about that. Because, I imagine that comes with its own sort of challenges, figuring out what to curate, what to put in that shop.
I honestly think it's because of what you said, where we didn't have any experience of working. Ken worked in a bookstore out of college, but we had no idea what the size or how many books you could hold. There were like forms and charts and things you could look at that could like help you estimate how many books to bring in. But it really was, we were really feeling our way through it. And like, if you look back at pictures, it's like front facing books. Like, obviously we didn't have as much inventory. There were like beautiful flowers in the table. Like, it just grew and grew and grew as like more things came to our attention as far as like what we wanted to get. And when you start a business, you can't always get relationships with every publisher right away. So for us, we wanted something that was manageable and felt like wasn't going to totally break us and be too big, that could be staffed with really just like one or two people at a time. The whole concept behind Now Serving was, where would Ken hang out on his day off? So it needed to have kind of like a record shop vibe. So small, intimate, but curated with stuff that was new and relevant, but like some things you may not know about that are necessary and referential. And that is kind of what dictated the whole energy of it, peppered in with like some lifestyle items to make me feel like I was contributing to the essence of it. So it kind of felt a little bit warmer than just a bookstore might feel if it was just books and that's it. I think at the end of the day, the numbers worked for us and the size didn't feel scary. So that's kind of why we landed on that. It is very small though.
Yeah, I've heard you maybe self-described as a mom and pop shop.
Oh, for sure.
It has and that size has a lot to do with being able to manage it that way. You answered the question, Michelle, about I think somewhere I read it's a kind of a gift shop, but not a gift shop, but because you have, in addition to the books, you have tools, and which just sort of blows my mind that you could fit all this into this very small footprint. But some kitchenware and some chef's clothing, and the tasting spoons get a lot of press, and note cards and things to go along with the books as well.
Right. Cookbooks are definitely one of those things that I'll meet people who are like, well, I don't cook out of cookbooks, but I'm looking for a present. So there's probably a lot of people out there who don't buy cookbooks for themselves, but have been gifted cookbooks, or that's like how their cookbook collection is comprised of things people have given them. So just having those little touches of like, oh, well, this plus maybe a tasting spoon or a wooden spoon or a mortar and pestle, or having additional things in the store kind of help to not alienate people who just might like books and things for their home, but are actually not cooks. And we do get a lot of people who are not cooks who really appreciate books. So it has definitely revealed itself to us that people have different reasons for why they come in or why they come back.
Right. Some people are going to go in for the curated cookbooks. Other people might be going in looking for a gift for someone they know who likes to cook, and they want the book plus one other thing. So you can kind of give them that option too. Because I do think that's a big part of what you do at Now Serving too, is the curation. Tell us a little bit about how you figure out what to carry in the shop. It just feels like there's more cookbooks that come out every season.
This is our 7th year. Every release season, it feels like there's hundreds of books that are coming in. And I mean, we say no to a lot. I really take a page out of Matt at Kitchen Arts and Letters, where I think he wrote an essay where he was like, this is why we say no to a lot of cookbooks. The curation part of it is really important. I mean, a lot of it is dictated by the space. I mean, in the early days, it was like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have like, an Instapot cook because we just don't have space for it. We've definitely grown from that point of view. But I do want to say that maybe because Michelle and I, we weren't like bookstore or publishing lifers, we didn't really know the language to use. So we just kind of built a place that we liked, we wanted to be around and be in. And it was also a way for us to figure out who our guest was, who our customer was, and who our audience is. Because, Michelle just said it was we're building a space that I would want to hang out, or a chef or a cook would want to hang out on their day off. But then you start with the books that they would want to read or want to buy. But then you think about what else do they like? They might like this kind of ceramic pasta bowl, or they would definitely want these tools around. Maybe they would want some work shoes that work really well. So it kind of was born out of that a bit. But I do want to say that thanks to Michelle, it's not 2 rows of books on sous vide, thankfully.
Thank you, Michelle.
The guests who have really molded the way Now Serving has grown, it really shows you who our guests and who our community is. And actually, when we opened, it was funny. We had such blinders on, when you're trying to open a business, we were like, okay, the hospitality industry kind of knows who we are and the chefs. And I remember we opened and there was we got all these like messages from other bookstores and book publications. And it was like, oh my gosh, people are just excited that there's a new bookstore opening. That was a time when I was like, oh, wow, I guess we are part of this bookstore community as well. Because we were thinking so niche, and it really kind of helped us open up a bit.
Because I'm sure you have people come in looking for the most popular new releases, for the big names. And I mean, I don't know anything about the book selling business, but I'm imagining you need a balance of, the things that you personally are super excited about the projects, but also enough popular appeal too. Like you say, your guests. I love that you call the customers guests. That's such a wonderful way to think about it. And it goes back to that whole community vibe of the place. But I just think that has to be very challenging to balance that. And Kate, we were talking earlier, are there more cookbooks than ever? I mean, it feels like it.
I know. It just seems that each fall is a little bit more daunting. And I think Molly and I spoke with Matt Sartwell about this a little bit. And I'd be curious to hear your take on it, because he was kind of saying, he wished publishers were a little bit more creative about release dates and not push so many big books to the fall, because it is overwhelming for bookstores. And we want to talk to you about this as well, events and how you do events. So, I mean, do you wish that there was just more release dates in general?
I definitely feel if they spread out release dates that we would be able to breathe a little bit easier throughout the year. It is kind of, there are two seasons, there's spring and fall. But I feel like I've noticed now, there used to not be June releases. And now we have June releases from authors that we're excited about. So maybe some of that is starting to happen. I think that there are more cookbooks coming out, because there's more people that they can tap to make a cookbook. Maybe when we started, it was food writers and restaurants and chefs and bloggers. And now you have this whole new audience of content creators who are getting book deals. I think there are more cookbooks coming out. So maybe they have to spread it out because it's the only way. And I also think people are probably thinking of getting on lists and best-selling lists. So if you're not competing against Ottolenghi, maybe you have a better chance of getting on it. So I think there's a lot of things that are happening on the marketing end and the back end that maybe we're not privy to, that will start dictating when things are released to try to get some of that. I don't know, but that's kind of what I'm thinking, because you are seeing more of a spread out a little bit.
I mean, I do wish that they would continue to spread it out a little bit more, just from an event standpoint. For us, March, April, May, it's bonkers. And then you're trying to figure out how to coordinate all these authors coming in and schedules and then moderators for those talks and venues if it doesn't always fit in the shop. So I think that it would be really helpful. I mean, there's, talking to some authors, and they talk about their release date. They say, oh, I'm not releasing in the fall, I'm in the spring. And I'm like, well, that's good, because there's more people that will be able to just kind of see who you are and get your book noticed. Because, just speaking to our physical space, there's only a certain amount of real estate for new releases. And I just put out this week's new releases, and I had to pull books that were only less than a month old.
To make space?
Just to make space.
Michelle, if you came from, say, a makeup artist, production background, I bet you had a lot of experience dealing with different locations, problem solving, always having to think on your feet. What kinds of things did you learn from your past career that have kind of contributed?
It's still my current career.
You're doing it all. You're still doing it. Oh my gosh.
I'm sure that there are skills that I've learned from production and working with different personalities and publicists that have been useful. I just think every experience you have in your life can lend itself to something else. I worked at corporate fast casual restaurants. The systems there have been sometimes show themselves in our shop. There are just things that you learn that you're like, well, this will be a little bit more efficient, because not only is the size of our store small, our staff is small. Mm-hmm. We're still very much there working the floor and doing everything else. You kind of have to use everything that you have to get through it, because you're doing it. It's not like we have a marketing person or a social media person or an events person or a receiving person or accounting. It's us, and it's very small business, mom and pop.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Everything Cookbooks, but it does take resources to make it happen, and we'd like to invite you, our loyal listeners, to help us keep the lights on. To support the show, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you can find links to any upcoming insider events where we go even further behind the scenes of our cookbook publishing world. You can also leave us a review, order books through our affiliate page, check out our t-shirts and sweatshirts and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. Every little bit of support really helps the show keep going. Thanks for listening.
I just want to hear about the trajectory of events with Now Serving, because it seems like a big part of what you do. And some of these events you've done have sell thousands of books.
We were really lucky because when we opened in September of 2017, there were a few cookbooks that were being released about Los Angeles restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to tap into that unknowingly. That is why we were able to get Baco. And at the Baco event, we met another author who said, I have a book that came out. And then that was our second event. So it just kind of snowballed a little bit that way. And then trying to get ahead of it and starting to realize that this was a thing and we can incorporate it and have it be part of programming and have programming. We didn't even think about programming.
Yeah, I remember in talking about the business plan of it, we always said there were going to be events, but we didn't really know what they were going to look like. A lot of it had to do with the rise of social media and being able to use that to get the word out. And I think LA was also really hungry for that.
Mm-hmm. What I keep hearing you talk about is how involved you are on a very, just a very granular level. This is your shop and you're very involved with all the decisions. So you're learning as you go and you're reacting as you go. So it has this organic growth to it, it feels like. But you also with the events, as Kate was saying, some of these are huge. So at what point do you say, oh, we can't fit this?
Michelle can talk about this for sure. But I think because of the size of our shop, which is, less than 500 square feet,
wow,
that kind of gave us, if we had a bigger shop, I don't think we would necessarily think outside the box of looking at larger venues, looking at doing as many restaurant collaborations that we do. It kind of keeps us really nimble in a sense. As far as the larger events, we've been so lucky and so privileged to be able to work with a number of authors who are best-selling authors that sell thousands and thousands of books. So we're really lucky to be able to tap into that at times. When it happens, it's just kind of like a pinch me moment for me, at least, to be able to see wow, this is our event in this theater, and it's really cool.
And you're being approached by those authors. They're coming to you, their publicists are coming to you and say, so-and-so is going to be in LA. Can we put on an event?
At the stage that we are now, we have relationships with the publicists.
That's great.
What I've noticed is that authors don't want to always do a talk. They're always looking for kind of experiential events. So authors today want different things. They don't always want an author talk. We also know that because of social media and the algorithm, that we really rely heavily on author promotion to get their audience to show up. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and it's a struggle. We'll get thrown numbers of as far as follower numbers and all the different platforms and combined engagement, and that doesn't translate to anything to us unless they're going to promote their event. Because our audience, at least through social media, is very specific on what they like, and so numbers don't necessarily matter. I think if you're following a cookbook store, you care about food, you care about books, you care about stories, you care about restaurants. And so sometimes we're not the right fit, Mm-hmm. I think because of all the different avenues that people can access their favorite food personality, food writer, chef. Sometimes they don't even want to hear them talk anymore because that's all they're doing is listening to them talk. Mm. So they just want to meet them, or they want to eat inspired food by them, or I don't know what it is. It's definitely changing and evolving. So as far as our audience for our events that are in the store, what's so great about it is it almost feels like these are our people, because they're want to know about something that may not be so mainstream, mm-hmm. but they will geek out about it with us.
So interesting. And for any of our listeners who don't follow you already on social media, I mean, it's a great follow, but it's also so interesting to see these events. And because a lot of our listeners are cookbook authors or aspiring cookbook authors, to look at it, with a really critical eye and figure out who's there and why and what you're doing, because it's far from cookie cutter. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. In 7 years, you've seen a lot of, you went through a pandemic, so your events went to Zoom for a while, but I'm more interested in kind of larger shifts you've seen in cookbooks during your time in business.
There is a lot of truth to these events and some of these authors is that sometimes they just want a selfie. If they already watch your videos, they already subscribe to this, and it's just like, just want to take a picture with you, and then that's it. You can have an author that has this massive social media following, but sometimes being that big, it doesn't make sense to do an event with us because their audience is
I could see that.
The other day, Michelle was saying such a brilliant phrase, but it was like, for better or worse, publishing is in fast fashion phase. To me, that really explains a lot about, for better or for worse, there are people who are getting book deals and, they've only been cooking for maybe 2 years, Some of that stuff is good, and then some of that stuff is just, a part of their brand that they're building. And it puts the impetus on Michelle and I to be able to really work hard to curate, to see what has legs. While I love and enjoy trends and the ebbs and flow of fashion, I think it's really important to be able to pull a book from the shelf and be able to kind of talk about it, and whether it be next year, 5 years, or 10 years from now. So
I also think that, what we have to come to terms with is that Ken and I came up pre-internet, as far as like being in school, like we had to research from books. So that is just also like a little bit of a fixed mentality of being like, this is my go-to when I need to learn something, is a book. And there's the new generation of cooks, that's not their go-to. It was the internet, it's apps, it's YouTube. So books don't translate to them the same way. And so as far as like what we expect and may want from a cookbook doesn't matter to them. So that's also like having to like grapple with what our expectations are, what makes a good book, what we want in a book versus what a publisher sees a new audience wants in a book, and how much money there is to make that book. The thing about content creators, nobody's eating the food. It can look really pretty. It could taste really bad. Nobody is asking the origin story. I mean, we are getting to a point where that has been on the forefront of like, let's give some credit to where it's due. But I don't know if publishing is like hiring a team of recipe testers to see if things work, So, but maybe the audience doesn't care, because they're actually not going to cook out of that. Because when they want to cook their food, they're going to cook it off of YouTube or something. It's like the reality of it. And I think that rather than fight it and be mad at it, for us, it's just about finding the people who want a book that's going to last a little while, or who care about not necessarily contributing to this flux of books that will maybe have one run and not get reprinted. And it's devastating for us when we love a book that's so good and does not get a second run. It's heartbreaking.
Right.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Or like restaurant chefs or like restaurant books that are great and we can't get them back because the audience is so small for it now.
I noticed you have a vintage, you're selling some vintage books as well. Part of your collection are old books.
That's a part of what we wanted to grow here. And I think it might be a response to the deluge of new books every year, is to kind of go back and find, voices from the past that are still relevant. So we're hoping to grow that this year and in the future. When we have like a vintage book and then, a younger cook or, this aspiring home baker finds it and they're just like, wow, this is so cool. And like, no matter how old you are, there's an appreciation there. That is very reassuring. I sound like an old person when saying this, but it's like when I see 20-somethings in the shop and they're really looking through, the new Ariel Johnson book, I feel like, okay, the kids they're all right. Like we're going to be in good hands. It's exciting that way.
Flavorama?
Flavorama, yeah.
Yeah. I think you're onto something, because I love that idea of thinking of it as a fast fashion phase, because maybe we can go back to a slow fashion phase, next.
We're in a slow fashion phase, though. You know what I mean? I think you're just going to get more people who are going to stop buying into that. I don't know what the dollars are translating for publishers when it comes to books from content creators. I don't want it to come across that I think all content creators are bad. I think there's amazing content creators. But a lot of times there is a gamble at first. And then there's like, once it's a success, then there's the second book or the third book, you know, but sometimes it's just the one and done. I don't know. I sound old. I want the quality.
No, I think you're making a really good point.
Right.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. And I think it's so right on to what's happening, and also your challenges as business owners who are selling books, and you want to have the books that people want, but you also want to have the books that you want to sell. And so figuring that out, which means you bring a very critical eye to what you're selling.
Right.
I think that in the time that we've been open, we've kind of known who the audience is. So it's like, we're not going to bring in a book that we have a feeling that most of the people might just buy on Amazon because it's going to be half off. I'm not trying to like win you over. It's like you either like us and you buy into what we're doing, or we're not for you. I think that is what keeps us sane, because if you start to think about all the other things or who's excelling and what, it's really important for us to remain and keep our voice of who we think we are and who the shop is, and just keep leaning into that, because then hopefully we'll find the people who like that. And then that's how it keeps going and it keeps growing. To try to be something else or try to be angry about something else or compete with something else is just, at our age especially, it's going to read really poorly.
But when you see someone in the shop taking a picture of a book jacket, and you know they're just taking that picture to go home and order it somewhere else. Yeah. We've all seen that.
Well, you know, what's interesting is this is very like current news for us because this is a hot topic. So we had a staff meeting about pictures in the shop. The thing is, if you're going to take a picture of the book, I just want you to use the book. So if you're going to buy it somewhere else and you're not going to buy it from us, then great. What we have issue with is when people take pictures of the recipes. And so we've had to actually create a policy where we ask guests to not take pictures of the insides of books. Okay, if you're going to buy it on Amazon, okay, great. You're going to buy it on Amazon. Go buy a book. Go read a book. Great. Keep it going. But if you're just taking a picture of the recipe, you have no intention of buying the book. And you probably won't actually make the recipe because you'll forget it's in your camera. So,
yeah.
From the start, we never had any desire to be a competitor with, the online behemoths out there, but we wanted to be the antithesis of it and we wanted to be able to offer what Amazon is not able to offer. And I think that speaks to a lot of what independent bookstores are trying to do. Whether it's the events in the community or being able to say hello to an actual human being when you walk into a shop and find out what they want to cook and what kind of restaurants do they go to and what they like. I think people actually really respond to that.
I think that's a great note to end on. I did want to ask, before we let you go, a lot of people who listen to the podcast are doing self-publishing. They're publishing their own book or they're going it alone. So tell us about the kinds of self-publishing projects that have caught your eye, and how did you find them?
If you decided to self-publish, you already know that it's going to be a grind and a hustle all the way. So mostly it's those authors are reaching out to us and seeing if we would be interested in it. From last year, there was Tacos CDMX from Guia Domingo in Mexico City, Plantasia by Pamelia Chia in Singapore. And I mean, even, celebrated authors like Katie Parla, she's gone the self-publishing route. Because, and both of know, what kind of money you get from big publishing. I think sometimes we'll get a guest in the shop and they're like, is there a Guatemalan book out that's new and we talk about it and I'm like, you have to write it. At this point, just write it. Try to get it out in the world, because this is a time where I think self-publishing is starting to take off to an extent. And with social media, you can really find your tribe that way.
If you're going to self-publish, I think that people can sometimes get really caught up on the budget. And it's very important to think about your budget, but not at the cost of the content. I think paper quality matters. I think printing quality matters. Writing matters. I think you need to find a team of people who you can have look at the work and give an honest opinion and as an author, be able to take that. I think sometimes labor of love projects need a little more research and they need a little detachment, because you still need to be saying something that's going to resonate and that feels different or unique or personal. We are in an age of like cookbooks that are telling stories and giving voices to people who didn't have their voices allowed to be heard at this level. So it's like, what is your point of view? Like, what are you saying that hasn't been said already? And present it in a way that's beautiful. We have seen some books, and I get it, it's a labor of love and it's like money, but you kind of have to really think about, like, it can't be so personal that it doesn't relate to anybody else. You know, it can't feel like this is something that you should just be giving to your members and your family.
Right. It's not a diary. It's not a community cookbook.
For sure. And if you're going to do that, we live in a great time of zines. Like, make a magazine. We'll take it.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if you, before we let you go, wanted to talk about your cookbook club at all.
It's kind of been something that we've been wanting to do and been talking about for years. Again, it was like, you just have to do it. So we're doing, it's 4 books. There's 5 categories: general cooking, plant-based, baking, food writing, and international. You get 4 books from each of those categories, except you get 5 books from food writing. The responses have been great, and it's really cool to kind of see. And what's exciting for us, I think, is like we just announced what the first round of books are, but we haven't decided, like, we don't have the whole year mapped out. And, you know, Michelle and I, we had a very like spirited discussion like a couple months ago where, you know, does the cookbook club represent what we think are going to be the best sellers of the year? Or are they actually going to be like the books that we want people to have on their shelves? So it's really exciting to kind of see.
That's so cool. I really could talk to you for hours, but we will let you get back to your very busy store. And once again, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is available wherever you get your audio, and if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review. It helps other people find the show. Any book mentioned can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thank you to our editor, Abby Circatella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.